Very simple. So give me, for both Mississippi State and Ole Miss, the 10 most important players, the top 10 most important players for the 2024 season. Not the best players, the most important if the teams are going to reach their goals this season.
Do we want to go 10-1 or 1-10?
10-1.
Hey, Dad, give me number 10 for Mississippi State.
Kyle Ferry is number 10. So we talk about him.
Kicker!
Yeah. I just feel like if you're at your state, you know that you're going to have some close games. You're probably going to have a game or two where a kick is going to make the difference between winning and losing. You better be good at that position. I like Kyle Ferry. I thought he was good as a true freshman. I expect him to improve coming into his sophomore year. I trust him out there. I think he'll be all right for State. State needs to, when they put the kicker on the field to get 3 points, they need to know that they can get 3 points, because I think defensively they're not going to be as good. So every time they have a chance to get points, they need to do it.
Number 10 for Ole Miss, Antoine Juice Wells, a healthy Juice Wells. He is a guy that has the ability to take the top off. He is a big play wide receiver. Ole Miss has got a good and deep wide receiving core, and if you've got multiple guys that defenses have to focus on, that makes it easier for everybody in the pass-catching game, quarterback included. And so Juice Wells is number 10. Who's number 9?
I'd be surprised by this one, but it's Stonka Burnside.
Oh, true freshman.
True freshman. You know, one of those true freshmen is going to step up, right? So I could have picked Harrell. I could have picked Craver. It would have been fine. This is more about Mississippi State fans' mental health. Is they've seen all these great wide receivers go to Ole Miss and have incredible seasons. State needs to have one of its 4-star receivers that it signed do that. Just have somebody who they can point to in the future, like that guy is an NFL guy for sure. I think Burnside's the most physically ready of that group, so I went with him.
Number 9 for me is left tackle Diego Pounds. The transfer in from North Carolina is going to, I think, anchor a revamped offensive line. It's an offensive line that's got a lot of experience. It's got a lot of experience at different places. Will the transfer from North Carolina translate to success in the SEC at Ole Miss? We'll have to wait and see. But I've got Diego Pounds at number 9 on the list.
All right. My number 8 is one of State's representatives for the SEC Media Days, and that's John Lewis. State has not really had a great pass rusher. Tyrus Reed was okay, but they haven't had a guy that struck fear into the hearts of an opposing offensive coordinator since Montez Sweat left, really. So they need a guy to step up and do that. So 7 and 8 on my list are State's, I think, best candidates for that. John Lewis is a great athletic linebacker, but we haven't seen a whole lot of him. The fact that he's going to media days gives me some hope that they feel like he's going to be a guy who can make a big impact for them. So I went with Lewis there.
My number 8 is Trey Washington. He was the leading tackler on Ole Miss's team a year ago, plays that strong safety spot where you've got to come up and help and run support, but you've also got to be able to drop back into some pass coverages. And as you do different things on the defense, that strong safety spot is important in a Pete Golding defense. Got to be able to do a lot of different things. He was a reliable player a year ago, and as I said, led the team in tackles. Ole Miss needs him to be that again this year.
All right, number 7 for me is a guy that, when he signed, I thought was going to be the next guy in the lineage of MSU defensive linemen, and that's Trevion Williams. Injuries have just kept him off the field the past 2 years, but I think he's the most talented guy in terms of ceiling on that MSU defensive line. He needs to step up at this point. He was a high-rated 4-star. He had offers from basically everybody. It's time to show up and show that wasn't, that you're not a bust, basically. Be healthy this year and give State somebody who can come off the edge and get to the quarterback.
Number 7 for me is a guy with a number in his name, Ulysses Bentley the fourth. The running back spot obviously has been important for Ole Miss. I guess you could put different names in this spot if you wanted to, but I think Ulysses Bentley is going to be the starter. As Borky pointed out earlier today, he's averaged over 5 yards per carry. How durable is he? How big of a load do they ask him to carry? I don't know the answers to those questions. he's not going to have to carry the ball 30 times a game. But if he gets 12 to 15 carries a game, is he able to turn that into, 75, 80 yards a contest? If they lean on him a little bit more, can he break off one of those big runs and average 100 yards a game? Can he be a 1,000-yard rusher? I'm not sure that there's a 1,000-yard rusher in this trio of backs that Ole Miss expects to use, but this is an opportunity for Ulysses Bentley. I've got him at number 7.
All right. My 5 and 6 are kind of tied together, too. We'll go with Bryce Pollock for number 6. The most experienced cornerback on the roster. I think he played in 5 games for Mississippi State last year. State needs a cornerback to step up. If State can't trust its corners, it's going to be a really, really long year for Mississippi State. Pollock's the most experienced guy. He's the guy I'm more sure will start than on the other side. So I've got Pollock there at 6.
I'm not sure that Borky would agree with me on this one because he's not convinced that this guy is going to be a starter. I think he is. Chris Paul, the transfer from Arkansas, who was a reliable tackler a year ago. That linebacker spot is interesting for Ole Miss. They're going to move some guys around. You're going to have guys that play multiple positions. But I think they would like to have an anchor in the middle of that defense at middle linebacker. Paul has been a good player. We'll see if he can continue to be that. You smirk every time I say Pooh, but
Paul.
That's what he says he wants to be called, so we'll go with Pooh.
Well, yeah, but when you go Christopher Paul, it just sounds like his
Christopher.
Name, it sounds like his name is Paul. It's not. It's Paul. It's
Pooh.
Chris Paul, like the point guard.
Yeah. So he's number 6 on my list.
All right. As I said, mine are tied together. So Kelly Jones is the other guy. I think he's going to be the other starting cornerback for State. Physically, he does not look like a cornerback. He looks like he should be a wide receiver. He's 6'4", 200+ pounds. I mean, he's just a big, tall kid. But he had a great spring, according to everybody I talked to up there. And I feel like physically he's got a lot of gifts. We'll see if it translates. Again, the secondary to me is State's. That's where all the questions lie for me on Mississippi State defensively. I feel okay about the defensive line. I feel okay about the linebackers. Their secondary is where I have questions. Those guys have got to step up, and you got to fill the roles of 4 straight NFL draft choices now with Dantzler, Emerson, Forbes, and then Ole Miss legend DeCamerion Richardson.
DeCam. Yeah. Number 5 on the list for me, and I guess we'll have to pause after this and carry it
right
into the
at
next
5.
segment. That's a good spot to do it. Caden Prieskorn. Simply put, the Ole Miss offense was considerably better when he was in the game and he was healthy. He is a good pass catcher. He is a pretty good blocker as well. He believes he's got an NFL future. I think that's the case. We'll have to wait and see how it plays out after the season. You go back to that Peach Bowl last year and you look at some of the catches he made. He has incredible hands. He is a guy that Jackson Dart trusts a lot in this offense. And kind of going back to where we started on this list with Juice Wells on the outside, obviously, there are a couple of other pretty important pieces in the passing game. You're going to get some mismatches with Caden Prieskorn. You're going to get linebackers matched up with Caden Prieskorn. That should be an advantage for Ole Miss if he's able to stay healthy, because you remember he did not start the year in the offense after a training camp injury a season ago. So a healthy Caden Prieskorn helps make this Ole Miss offense go. He's number 5 on the list. We'll pick up with the top 4 players for both Mississippi State and Ole Miss, the 4 most important players in our minds. We are counting down the 10 most important players. Michael Borky said, not the best necessarily, but the most important players on the roster for Mississippi State and for Ole Miss. We have done the top 6 on both of our lists. Hey, Dad, you are up with number 4.
Just not a lot of SEC experience on this defense. So this is one of the more experienced guys, and he may have the biggest shoes to fill, and that's Stone Blanton. Ooh. Trying to replace approximately 613 tackles last year from Buki Watson in the middle there. But he's really the only – Purvis has started a few games, and Ty Cooper has gotten some playing time. Dontarie Russell's some playing time, but Blanton's got probably the most starts. So he's got to come in and lead this defense. Never mind production. They need some leadership as well. I think he's going to have to provide that. So there's a lot of pressure on him coming in his first year in Starkville.
Interesting that you used that word because it's one that I was thinking about with number 4 on my list also, and that's Jared Ivey. Obviously, production on the field from that defensive end spot is going to be important, but I think equally important when you've got a veteran player that is a producer on the field, you need that leadership in the locker room on that particular side of the ball. If you've listened to Jared Ivey talk, he is a really bright guy. He hosts a podcast and kind of a YouTube series and seems like a guy that teammates gravitate to. Jared Ivey on the defensive line, number 4 on my list.
Kind of the same thing that I've done a few times. There's a theme here. There's some guys who are tied together. So number 3 for me is Ethan Minor, State's likely starting center.
Okay.
State's offensive line last year, I don't know to say it was bad or good last year because the offense was just so bad overall. I don't know that blocking was the biggest issue, but State went out and got 4 new offensive linemen to come in from the transfer portal, and Minor was probably the most highly rated guy in that group. State's center play over the past few years has been a little inconsistent at times, so they need somebody to step in there and just give them a bedrock to build around in the middle of that offensive line. So Minor will be key to what they want to do offensively.
Number 3 for me is the guy that was probably talked most about among the new players for Ole Miss. That's Walter Nolan, the transfer from Texas A&M. The last time that Ole Miss, correct me if I'm wrong here, Borky, I think the last time that Ole Miss had a defensive lineman with the potential to be as disruptive as Walter Nolan potentially could be was Robert Kimdichie.
Yeah.
And if you go back to Robert Kimdichie, especially his junior season, you don't necessarily look and go, man, his stats just blow you away. But the fact is, he was at the top of the scouting report for every opposing team because of what he was capable of in terms of disruption in the middle of that line. If Walter Nolan can assume that role, he's got to make plays, obviously. He's got to make tackles. He's got to be able to put pressure on the quarterback. But if he can take the focus of the offensive line, if he can be the guy that every time he's on the field has to be identified by an opposing offensive line, it just opens up things for other players to make plays as well. So he's got to make plays, but he's got to be the type player that is disruptive enough that it allows other people to make plays, whether it's a linebacker stepping up or a defensive end getting around the edge because somebody's particularly focused on the interior of that line. To me, that's why Walter Nolan is number 3 on this list.
Staying on the offensive line for me, this is going to be an offense that's going to throw the ball a good bit, and they're going to want to run the football a lot. The O-line is just so important. McConlin Pounder's coming in. He needs to be a stud left tackle for Mississippi State. Charles Cross a couple years ago, first-round pick. I don't think that Pounders is that kind of talent, but he needs to be a guy that you can just put out there on the island and feel good about where you are with him. He was really good at Memphis a couple years ago. He should be highly motivated here at Mississippi State to come back home and play in front of his home state. I think he's going to be a really good player for the Bulldogs. He's very, very important in this year.
Number 2 for me is Trey Harris. He was phenomenal a season ago at Ole Miss, and everything is set up for him to have a really big final year of college football. Last season, he had 54 catches for 985 yards and 8 touchdowns. It feels like he needs to be a 1,000-yard receiver, and I think he's got a really good chance to do that. I think there's a good chance that he finishes with double-digit touchdowns, which he did in 2022 at Louisiana Tech when he had 10 receiving touchdowns in that ball game. The senior from Lafayette, Louisiana, it's obviously draft year for him. This is his last year of college football. I don't think of him in terms of having the same blazing speed. There's plenty of speed there, but I don't think of him necessarily as that guy that just immediately takes the top off. But his ability to make difficult catches, his ability to make contested catches, to move the chains, and then to be there for some big plays as well, to me makes him really, really important. And I feel like the receiving core kind of works hand in hand. Okay, are you going to focus on Trey Harris? That should open things up for Juice Wells. Are you going to focus on Juice Wells and Caden Prieskorn? Well, that should open up things for Trey Harris. We'll see how it all plays out. But Trey Harris, to me, the number 2 most important player on the Ole Miss roster.
Borky, I cheated here. Just going to go ahead and tell you. I mean, Blake Shapen was too obvious to put on this list. Way too obvious. Obviously, he is the number one player. Every team in college football, basically, the quarterback's the most important player. So he's not number one on my list.
Good.
Kelly
I like that.
Akari is number one on my list. And it goes back to what I was talking about a little earlier with Stonka Burnside. 1996. That is the last time a Mississippi State wide receiver was drafted into the NFL draft.
Ooh.
That was Eric Moulds. That's how long it's been. Akari, you got to see him in the spring game, Richard. He looks the part.
Yeah,
His numbers from UTEP were fantastic. This is an offense that every year Levy has called plays has had a receiver that maybe came out of nowhere and became a stud. It's not just Elijah Moore, Dontario Drummond, Marvin Mims, Drake Stoops last year, 84 catches, 962 yards. There's going to be a receiver that steps up and becomes a big play target. Akari is going to get the first crack at that. State needs him to be good. They need to hit on him in the transfer portal. He needs to be around those numbers, 50, 60, 70 catches, 800, 900,000 yards. That's what they need from Kelly Akari.
Unlike you, I'm going to go with what the assignment actually was, which was to put the 10 most important players on a list. Jackson Dart is the most important player on Ole Miss's list. He has improved in every season as a college quarterback. In 2021 at USC, he completed just shy of 62% of his passes. In 2022 at Ole Miss, he was over 62%. Last year, 65% on 3,364 yards. Passing touchdowns have gone up every single year. From his first year at Ole Miss to his second year at Ole Miss, his interceptions went from 11 to 5. His passer rating went up significantly a season ago. Everything that Jackson Dart does matters. The passing game matters. What he does with his feet matters. The leadership matters. Teammates gravitate to him. This is Jackson Dart's football team. It's not even debatable. He is the most important player on this Ole Miss roster going into 2024, a season where anything short of being in the college football playoff is going to be a disappointment for Ole Miss fans. It's going to be a disappointment for Ole Miss players as well. Jackson Dart needs to stay healthy. He needs to be smart. He needs to take care of the football and make the plays when they are there. That is why Jackson Dart is the number one most important player on Ole Miss's roster, and it's simply not close.
I do disagree with something that Haydad said on the quarterback front, that most every team would have quarterback number one. Well, I agree, but with an add-on. If you look over at Texas, according to the SEC's leading football expert analyst,
let it go.
There would be two quarterbacks on his list.
And that's why, I think Carson Beck is very important for Georgia. But at the same time, if he went down, Rashada would probably still be good enough to get them where they want to go. So that's what I said. 95% of your teams, your QB is the number one guy.
You gave the assignment. Give grades on the assignment.
I mean, that was exactly what I was hoping it would be.
All right. A's.
Yes,
A's
sir.
all around.
How did we pull that off? We didn't even have to